Welcome to this exploration of Yann LeCun's vision for artificial machine intelligence. At the heart of this debate lies a tension. Should intelligence be grounded primarily in sensory experience, or is language the indispensable medium that makes human cognition portable and cumulative? This presentation argues that without language, LeCun's world model cannot cross into the symbolic domains that define civilization. We begin with an introduction to the context and the core proposition of this analysis. LeCun proposes artificial machine intelligence, or AMI, as a corrective to today's language-dominated AI systems. AMI emphasizes sensory grounding, self-supervised learning, and intrinsic motivation. In his view, intelligence emerges from machines simulating reality, predicting outcomes, planning actions, and learning autonomously without relying on linguistic tokens. Large language models, or LLMs, operate by predicting the next word in a sequence. LeCun critiques this as shallow, arguing that such systems lack genuine reasoning and planning. AMI, by contrast, aims to build internal simulations of the physical world, enabling agents to reason about space, causality, and mechanics rather than text alone. In LeCun's framework, language is treated as secondary. It is useful for communication, but not essential for cognition. He sees language as a byproduct of intelligence, not its substrate. This position challenges centuries of thought that place symbolic systems at the core of reasoning and abstraction. Yet this article argues the opposite. Language is indispensable. It is the symbolic filter that allows us to compress complex realities into concepts, combine them into new ideas, and transmit knowledge across generations. Without language, intelligence remains bound to the physical, unable to represent law, ethics, or mathematics, the very domains where human cognition thrives. Purely sensory models face a ceiling. They can map pixels, sounds, and physical dynamics, but they cannot capture justice, fairness, or philosophical reasoning. A courtroom trial may be recorded acoustically and visually, but the concept of justice exists only in symbolic interpretation. This is the critical gap AMI cannot cross if language is marginalized. Next, we will review the specific claims that underpin LeCun's argument for the world model. LeCun asserts that reasoning can persist without language. He points to cases where patients lose linguistic ability, yet retain problem-solving skills. From this, he concludes that cognition is mathematically decoupled from linguistic representation. LeCun characterizes LLMs as mere next-word predictors. In his view, they mimic logical sequencing but lack the ability to execute hierarchical planning or internal verification. This reduction frames LLMs as incapable of genuine reasoning. He argues that text-based models manipulate symbols of a world they have never physically experienced. Without sensory grounding, they cannot build robust models of reality or reliably navigate environments. LeCun cites neurological evidence, patients with aphasia who lose language but retain reasoning. He interprets this dissociation as proof that reasoning relies on a distinct, non-linguistic substrate. LeCun hypothesizes that abstract principles, like scientific laws, can emerge directly from sensory data. He envisions a pipeline where raw observations condense into general rules without semantic mediation. Latent space is presented as a superior computational substrate. Unlike discrete embeddings used in LLMs, latent space compresses sensory data into continuous states, preserving relationships while discarding noise. This, LeCun argues, enables dynamic prediction of fluid physical processes. LeCun predicts that sensory-driven world models will surpass LLMs. Because they rely on infinite self-supervised sensory data rather than finite human-generated text, he sees them as more aligned with reality and therefore more scalable toward general intelligence. Finally, LeCun concludes that LLMs are a structural dead end. He argues that scaling parameters or datasets cannot overcome their lack of physical grounding. Any emergent reasoning they display is dismissed as a temporary illusion rather than genuine progress. The article closes part 1 with a challenge. Intelligence is not merely navigating physical space. It is the construction of shared symbolic realities, law, philosophy, society. An AI restricted to sensory prediction is forever exiled from the conceptual architectures that define humanity. Without language, LeCun's world model cannot travel into the domains where human intelligence truly resides. We now move to a detailed look at the Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture, or JEPA. LeCun places the Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture, or JEPA, at the very center of his vision for artificial machine intelligence. JEPA is designed not to predict text, but to predict missing sensory information, unseen portions of images, future frames in video, or gaps in multimodal input. It is his proposed perceptual backbone for machines that learn directly from the physical world. JEPA functions as a sensory prediction engine. It learns by filling in gaps in multimodal input, visual, auditory, and motion streams without relying on labeled datasets. It compresses sensory data into latent space, mathematical representations where relationships between features can be modeled and inferred. Unlike generative models that produce text or images, JEPA focuses entirely on internal prediction, modeling what is missing rather than generating new external outputs. LeCun envisions multiple JEPA variants tailored to different sensory domains. IJEPA targets static images, representing spatial layouts through pixel grids. VJEPA models temporal continuity in video, capturing sequential flow and state changes. MCJEPA embeds motion and content dynamics, tracking kinetic relationships within environments. Together, these variants form a triad of sensory modeling. JEPA relies on self-supervised learning. It masks parts of sensory input and trains itself to reconstruct them. Through joint embedding, it aligns context and target representations in latent space, inferring missing elements from surrounding data. By embedding temporal and spatial dynamics, JEPA aims to capture causal structure, how the world behaves, not just how it looks or sounds. LeCun imagines agents driven not by external rewards, but by curiosity. In this paradigm, JEPA serves as the perceptual core of autonomous agents, continuously motivating them to explore, resolve uncertainty, and learn from their environment. This curiosity-driven architecture is meant to replace reinforcement learning with intrinsic motivation. LeCun argues that JEPA grounds intelligence directly in reality, bypassing the symbolic bottleneck of language. He claims it can scale across modalities, generalizing from vision to motion to interaction. He positions JEPA as the perceptual backbone for autonomous agents capable of planning and acting. And by avoiding token-based learning, he believes JEPA can reach forms of intelligence inaccessible to language models. JEPA is not just a technical proposal. It is the centerpiece of Amy Labs, LeCun's new venture backed by over $1 billion in funding. In his narrative, JEPA embodies the philosophical and architectural foundation of Amy, the belief that true intelligence must emerge from perception, not from the prediction of language. This section of the video will outline the problems and weaknesses associated with the world model concept. Problem 1. Language is central to cognitive wiring. Human intelligence is fundamentally linguistic, and knowledge accumulates through symbolic scaffolding. The alternative vision, solely based on sensory input, risks being non-cumulative. Problem 2. Emergent reasoning beyond prediction. LLMs exhibit internal planning and strategy, challenging the idea that they are merely shallow predictors. Planning is inferred from behavior, not just the mathematical substrate. Problem 3. Physical world understanding is already operational. Robotics and autonomous vehicles demonstrate real-time physical reasoning, integrating sensory and linguistic AI. The critique that AI lacks physical grounding applies narrowly to text-only models. Problem 4. Conflating persistence with origin. Patients who lose language retain reasoning because their brains were already structured through linguistic development. Machines need symbolic systems to develop robust reasoning. Problem 5. The impossibility of learning without language. Representation itself is a form of language. Non-linguistic learners, like infants and animals, never attain human-level abstraction, suggesting that learning without language is conceptually incoherent. Problem 6. Latent space is not fundamentally superior. Both LLM embeddings and JEPA latent spaces are compressed vectors manipulated through linear algebra. The distinction between them as symbolic abstractions is vastly overstated. Problem 7. Sensory models fail at abstract domains. Sensory-driven models are weaker at capturing abstract concepts. A purely sensory model risks narrowness, as human intelligence thrives on language for representation beyond the physical. Problem 8. The dead end keeps moving. LLMs continuously expand capabilities in areas like reasoning, multimodality, tool use, and agentic action. The burden of proof lies with the speculative Amy vision, not the demonstrated success of LLMs. Problem 9. JEPA's fatal abstraction gap. Justice is a normative, linguistic construct, not a sensory feature. Without a semantic layer of language, JEPA reduces abstract concepts to surface behavior, missing their true meaning. We now move to the fifth section of this video, analysis, which covers the logic behind the points discussed. In this section, we critically examine LeCun's world model by foregrounding the role of language. Human cognition is inseparable from symbolic systems. Language compresses raw sensory input into discrete, manipulable concepts, enabling abstraction, compositionality, and cultural transmission. Without language, intelligence cannot travel across individuals or generations. Machines, like humans, require symbolic encoding to make knowledge cumulative and portable. Reasoning does not emerge in isolation. It is scaffolded through years of linguistic development. Education provides the blueprint. Social interaction reinforces reasoning through dialogue, and symbolic representation creates permanent structures for abstract thought. Patients who retain reasoning after language loss do so because their brains were already wired through linguistic scaffolding. This persistence proves endurance, not origin. Language is the pipeline through which intelligence travels. Without symbolic encoding, knowledge remains local and non-cumulative. With language, information can be compressed, transmitted, and expanded across generations. This cumulative property is what makes human intelligence unique, and why machines must adopt symbolic systems if they are to achieve general intelligence. LeCun reduces LLMs to caricatures of next word prediction, yet their behavior tells another story. Modern LLMs maintain thematic consistency, develop arguments sequentially, and signal structure. These are hallmarks of planning. In cognitive science, we infer planning from behavior, not substrate. The autoregressive mechanism does not negate the functional reality of emergent reasoning. LeCun argues AI lacks grounding in the physical world, but robotics and autonomous vehicles already demonstrate perception, navigation, and decision-making in complex environments. These systems integrate sensor fusion, predictive modeling, and real-time planning. Moreover, LLMs are increasingly paired with robotics, showing that linguistic and physical intelligence can complement each other. Patients who lose language retain reasoning only because their brains were structured through years of linguistic development. This persistence does not prove reasoning can emerge without language. It proves only that once pathways are established, they endure despite damage. Machines cannot bypass the symbolic training phase and expect robust reasoning to emerge. Learning requires representation, and representation is language. Even scientific formulas like F equals ma are symbolic tokens that compress meaning into manipulable form. Infants and animals plateau because they lack symbolic scaffolding. Human learning is not raw sensory input. It is perception encoded into symbols, manipulated, and socially transmitted. AMI's attempt to bypass language misunderstands the substrate of intelligence. LeCun presents latent space as fundamentally different from embeddings. Yet both are compressed vectors manipulated through linear algebra. Embeddings map words into high-dimensional vectors. Latent space maps sensory data into compressed vectors. Both are symbolic abstractions. The distinction is overstated. Latent space is not a radical departure, but another form of symbolic manipulation. LeCun promises sensory-driven world models will outperform LLMs. But this claim lacks evidence. Sensory models are inherently weaker at capturing abstract concepts beyond the physical world: law, mathematics, philosophy, justice. Human intelligence thrives because language allows us to represent abstractions far removed from immediate perception. LLMs excel precisely in this domain. LeCun's dismissal of LLMs as a dead end has been contradicted repeatedly. Each new generation expands capabilities: reasoning, multimodality, tool use, abstraction. What was once dismissed as illusion has become routine. AMI remains speculative, with no working system to demonstrate superiority. The burden of proof lies with LeCun's vision, not with the demonstrated success of LLMs. JEPA excels at embedding sensory data to infer unseen portions of streams. It can fill in masked parts of images, anticipate video frames, and model object dynamics. For physical continuity and causality, this is powerful, but its strength lies firmly in the sensory domain. Abstract domains such as justice, freedom, or mathematics do not exist in raw sensory data. They are cultural, symbolic, and linguistic constructs. Humans learn them through stories, laws, debates, and symbolic representation. JEPA has no mechanism for learning abstractions that are not perceptually grounded. A courtroom scene can be captured as sensory data, speech sounds, gestures, documents. But the concept of justice is not in the pixels or audio waves. It resides in symbolic interpretation encoded in language and law. JEPA can model courtroom scenes, but without language, it cannot abstract fairness, rights, or cultural norms. Justice requires symbolic grounding. When asked to write about justice, JEPA must translate the query into sensory embeddings, perform calculations, and then retranslate into symbolic tokens. This detour introduces inefficiency, distortion, and semantic loss. LLMs, by contrast, manipulate symbolic tokens directly, making them more effective and accurate in non-physical domains. Human cognition relies fundamentally on non-physical abstraction. Sensory prediction alone cannot scale to general intelligence. Language is not just an interface. It is the currency of intelligence itself. LLMs are structurally aligned with human cognition because they manipulate symbolic tokens directly. JEPA, by contrast, remains blocked by the abstraction gap. This section provides a comparison between large language models, or LLMs, and joint embedding predictive architectures, or JEPA. Let's begin with the core mechanisms. Language models predict the next token in text, building symbolic sequences that encode meaning. JEPA, by contrast, predicts missing sensory information, images, audio, video, within a latent space. One is symbolic, the other sensory. This distinction defines their respective strengths and limitations. LLMs excel at abstraction, reasoning, and symbolic manipulation across diverse domains. Their tokens translate directly into symbolic grounding of concepts like justice, law, or mathematics. JEPA, on the other hand, is strong at modeling physical dynamics and perception. Its latent vectors compress sensory features, pixels, sounds, gestures, but they remain tied to the physical world. LLMs have limited direct grounding in the physical world, but they integrate effectively with robotics and multimodal inputs. JEPA is designed inherently for sensory grounding, making it highly effective at predicting physical phenomena. In this domain, JEPA shines, but its scope is narrow. Here lies the abstraction barrier. LLMs seamlessly represent cultural, ethical, and mathematical concepts through language. JEPA cannot. It reduces abstractions into observable sensory patterns, missing the symbolic essence. This is the critical gap between sensory prediction and symbolic reasoning. Consider justice. LLMs encode justice through laws, debates, symbolic tokens, and cultural narratives. JEPA captures courtroom visuals and speech audio, but misses the normative meaning. Pixels and waveforms cannot convey fairness or rights. Justice lives in language, not in sensory data. LLMs continue to expand capabilities, multimodality, tool use, emergent reasoning, directly refuting the dead-end critique. JEPA remains speculative, with no mechanism to scale into symbolic or cultural domains. No working system demonstrates superiority. The trajectory of progress favors language models. Let's move on to the conclusion, summarizing the implications of these comparisons. JEPA is undeniably powerful in the sensory realm. It embeds high-fidelity images, audio, and video into latent spaces, predicting missing information and modeling physical dynamics. For localized tasks like object recognition or environmental prediction, JEPA is highly effective. Yet when confronted with the non-physical world, law, ethics, mathematics, philosophy, JEPA falters. A learner that cannot process abstractions is incomplete. Intelligence must extend beyond perception into symbolic domains. Concepts like justice are not contained in courtroom pixels or trial acoustics. They reside in symbolic interpretation, linguistic representation, and cultural scaffolding. JEPA cannot abstract meaning, encode norms, or transmit values. Language is required to cross this boundary. Sensory grounding has undeniable value, but LLMs are already integrating with robotics and multimodal inputs. The future of AI will be hybrid, combining sensory learning with language, functioning symbiotically with language as the reasoning engine. LeCun's error is subordinating language, treating it as an afterthought. In reality, language is the indispensable substrate of abstraction. By marginalizing it, Amy builds a framework trapped in the physical world, unable to cross into symbolic domains where human intelligence resides. Language is the medium through which abstraction becomes possible. LLMs succeed because they compress and manipulate symbolic knowledge, enabling rigorous reasoning across domains far removed from immediate perception. This is why they thrive. Intelligence must travel beyond the sensory world into symbolic and cultural domains. Without language, LeCun's world model cannot cross that boundary. And without crossing it, Amy cannot surpass the demonstrated success of LLMs. Language is not optional. It is the currency of intelligence itself. This final section is not part of the core critique, but rather an addendum. It clarifies the logical fallacies and foundational concepts that frame LeCun's arguments. By examining these patterns, we gain tools for interpreting similar claims in future debates about artificial intelligence. We will focus on 8 fallacies, or breaks in logic, identified within the world model critique. An unfalsifiable claim is one that no possible evidence could disprove. LeCun's assertion that LLMs are a dead end falls into this category. Any progress they make is reinterpreted as temporary or illusory. This seals the claim off from empirical traction, making it rhetorical rather than scientific. Unfalsifiability creates the illusion of foresight, but cannot advance knowledge. LeCun frames AI development as a strict choice, either LLMs, which he calls a dead end, or world models, which he claims represent true intelligence. This is a false dichotomy. It ignores hybrid approaches that integrate language with sensory grounding. Oversimplification dismisses the possibility that intelligence may require both symbolic and sensory systems working together. A straw man misrepresents an opponent's position to make it easier to attack. LeCun reduces LLMs to mere next-word predictors, ignoring evidence of emergent reasoning, planning, and abstraction. By attacking a caricature, he avoids engaging with their actual capabilities, weakening the credibility of his critique. A category error occurs when one type of phenomenon is mistaken for another. LeCun treats justice, mathematics, and philosophy as if they could be learned from sensory prediction alone. These are symbolic domains, not perceptual ones. Misapplying perceptual tools to symbolic constructs misdirects research agendas and prevents progress. Taken together, these fallacies form a diagnostic matrix. Unfalsifiability seals claims off from evidence. False dichotomy erases hybrid paths. Strawman attacks caricatures instead of real capabilities. Category error misapplies perceptual methods to symbolic domains. Each fallacy halts progress by misdirecting inquiry away from the phenomena that matter. Next, we will examine 3 essential concepts critical to understanding the limitations of the world model approach. Latent space is a compressed mathematical representation where data features are embedded for modeling relationships. JEPA uses latent space to predict missing sensory information, such as unseen parts of an image or future frames in a video. Imagine folding a large map into a small notebook. Relationships are preserved, but detail is lost. Latent space is powerful for physical prediction, but it cannot encode abstract concepts like justice or fairness. Symbolic grounding is the process of mapping sensory input into linguistic tokens that carry meaning. Humans use language to abstract upward from perception, turning experiences into enduring concepts like law or freedom. A courtroom transcript is not just sound waves, it is a symbolic record of arguments and verdicts. Without symbolic grounding, JEPA can only model acoustics and visuals, not justice itself. Self-supervised learning trains models by predicting missing parts of input data without labeled datasets. JEPA learns by filling in gaps in sensory streams, such as predicting the next video frame. Think of it like guessing the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle based on surrounding pieces. While effective for perception, self-supervised learning cannot generate abstractions beyond sensory data without language. Justice is a normative, cultural, and linguistic construct. It emerges from laws, debates, and symbolic interpretation, not from pixels or audio waves. Watching a trial without understanding the language is like seeing actors move on stage without grasping the play's meaning. JEPA cannot represent justice without a semantic layer. This exposes its fundamental limitation in modeling the non-physical world. Finally, we compare paradigms. Latent space models excel at physical prediction, acoustics, pixels, video frames. Symbolic grounding excels at abstract concepts, justice, law, mathematics. Intelligence cannot be fully modeled by systems blind to semantic reality. Without language, sensory prediction remains incomplete, unable to capture the essence of human cognition.